Good morning, everyone. It'll just be a few moments and we'll get started. If you have any questions, just add them to the comment area right now, and I should be able to get to them before the end of the day. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Welcome to the 29th installment my weekly virtual office hours. Happy October. Uh, Entered a brand new month. People continue to reach out and say they really appreciate these weekly live stream addresses. So, in hearing from the mayor, so I'll continue these through the end of the shelter in place and even longer, depending on how long that'll take. Um, this Facebook Live event is a great chance for me on a weekly basis to give you updates on what's happening, answer some of your questions, and of course just provide some words of encouragement. Thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during these extraordinary times we're living in. I hope everyone's staying healthy, staying sane. You know, Definitely doing whatever you can. It's been a long summer, and the issues continue to happen. Bad air is back again, so hopefully people are not exerting themselves too much, especially outside of the household, and hopefully the air will clear up in the next day or two. Please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. These are difficult times for a lot of people, and follow the county health orders. You can really do your part to stop the spread of the virus. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, reduce the number of people that you're coming in contact with. Maintain safe social distancing while you're out, and of course, wear your mask. Uh, it helps. It's mandatory. And as I've said before, if you need a face covering of some sort, definitely feel free to reach out to me. I've been I also have them at the farmers market. When I'm there doing tabling, so you can also pick one up there. We're not out of the woods yet. We're seeing a steady decline, a decline in the number of cases, COVID cases within the county, within the state. But anyone you could meet could be a carrier of the virus, or you could be asymptomatic. You couldn't show any symptoms. So please be safe. That's critical at the end of the day. Uh, Today we reached a new milestone. It's now 200 days since the March 16th public health order went into place, and that order attempted to stop the spread of the virus or slow it quite a bit. And since that declaration, a lot has happened. A lot more happens every day. I'm always surprised by my inbox on a daily basis or what I see on the news. So, I have daily press conferences to watch and seminars to attend. I have conference calls to confer and advocate on your behalf. And, with that, let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at the federal, the state, county, and city level over the last week or two. So, first, a week ago, so last Thursday night, we had our fifth Unity event, and this was a public safety roundtable discussion. So since the murder of George Floyd, I worked with the city manager, and we committed to hearing back from our residents, and so this was the fifth of several Unity listening sessions, all virtual. People could call in or be on their computers. You can see those on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch some of the previous sessions. The first one was a general listening session. We then had a youth-based one, an LGBTQ one. Earlier, beginning of September, we had a Spanish-speaking one, and then just last Thursday we had the DPS Public Safety Roundtable, which to me was really good because you heard from the chief, you heard from our public safety chief, as well as several of the deputy chiefs talking about their experience in law enforcement within Sunnyvale, as well as outside of Sunnyvale if they had worked at other agencies. And it was just, it was good to hear some of their direct answers to some of the questions that we continue to receive. If you want to stay up to date, of course, go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/unity to hear more. And ultimately, that outreach and the kind of a summary of that outreach will come back to council later in October. So that'll be a study session later this month. From my standpoint, this was part of of taking, Obama's mayor's pledge. It was reviewing our policies, and because of that, we ended up removing the carotid hold, which was the last of our holds from our policies. It's reviewing our policy, engaging our community, and so that's what we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 months now, engaging the community to hear what your concerns were, to hear your positive and negative feedback on our public safety department, and then of course report our results, which will happen later this October, and then of course reform. And we've already been doing some reforms based upon what we think are best practices. So that to me is important, and so you can go and watch that video. The study session that'll come back to council will be, I'll talk about that. The study session, or the office hours before that comes back to council. And then last Thursday night was also the Mary Avenue Overpass outreach meeting. So it was a busy night. We had quite a few people attend that. So Mary Overpass has been part of the general plan for the city since the 70s, and this is getting feedback on what's envisioned there, and what's envisioned is conceivably a bridge that goes from where Mary ends right now at Alamore in the north, over 101, over 237, and landing approximately at 11th Street in Moffett Park. And so there's 5 proposed alternatives that are being considered. A 4-car lane Mary. So Mary would be open with 4 cars as far as the bridge is concerned, plus a bike and pedestrian area. Then it would be 2-car lanes plus a bike and pedestrian area. Then shuttles only plus bike and pedestrian, or just a bike and pedestrian bridge going over that area. And then of course the 5th option is no plan at all. So that's from an EIR standpoint, we need to look at all possible options. So that's that. Go back and take a look at that YouTube video if you get a chance. There's a survey open kind of to get a better feel for how people currently commute into Moffett Park, what their transportation modes are. And so that's that survey is open until October 15th, and there'll be more community outreach later that will happen. And so that's an ongoing effort as far as we further define what the community needs are, as well as getting community feedback. So I think that's important from an engagement standpoint. On Monday, Governor Newsom held a press conference, and this was kind of an update on COVID, on fires. The big thing is, at this point, more than 800,000 people have from California have contacted COVID-19. But the positive thing is there's been a general decrease in new test cases, positivity rates over the last 14 days. So that's actually been really good. It's the 7-day average is dropped quite a bit. It's about 3,300 positive test cases over the last 7 days, and then the 7-day positivity rate has been 2.9%. Of course, it's from a death toll. It's still fairly high from a state standpoint. We've had over 15,000 people die related to COVID-19, and so and Governor Newsom also raised the issue, of course, is it's beginning of flu season. So and actually got a shot during one of his press conferences this week, but basically sent the word of warning that you really need to go out and get your flu shot. It's a way to protect yourself and mitigate the impacts of the flu within the season. And the concept of a twindemic, when we potentially have still COVID-19 cases appearing and then flu happening concurrently, it just puts a lot of pressure on our hospital system. So doing what you can, doing your part to try to prevent getting the flu, and hopefully, wearing your mask is a critical portion of that, but that's important. And then from a fire standpoint, you know, the the concept of conceivably having a million acre fire going on. There's been a lot of measures and a lot of funding that's put forth to that. And then you've seen this week the photos from the wine region. The glass fire has really affected Napa, and a lot of people have lost their homes and lost their vineyards, and so it is affecting a lot of the state. So definitely, it's critical time, and the air quality, the red sunrises and sunsets lately have only showed how bad the air has been. So please be safe when you're out there. On Monday, also the county health department issued new guidelines for Halloween, and so I've been getting a lot of these questions about what does Halloween look like? Is Halloween canceled? And pushing the county supervisors that you know uh, Halloween can't be canceled, and there has to be directives on what is safe, what's not safe. And I think they've reached kind of a they issued these orders to kind of say that our old trick-or-treating is a high-risk activity, because you're coming in contact with people outside of your household, outside of your normal bubble, who conceivably may not be careful with COVID-19. So, it's highly recommended that, members participate in low risk activities to celebrate Halloween and Dia de los Muertos however they can. So let's talk about, from their county health order and kind of directives, what lower risk activities are. Of course, staying home, keeping everything very small is the best thing you can do. So celebrating, Halloween by carving pumpkins within your household, visiting an outdoor pumpkin patch while wearing your mask, carving or decorating pumpkins, maybe outside with a few neighborhood members, as long as you're staying 6 feet apart. All those are things that are kind of low risk at the end of the day. Wearing your mask throughout anything, having a virtual costume contest, and that's one of the things that the pet parade is looking to do is try to have a virtual pet parade this year. So you'll be hearing more about that, and then conceivably participating, dressing up your house or apartment, your living space, your car with Halloween decorations, or a vehicle, kind of a vehicle-based gathering to comply with state local guidelines. So a drive-in movies currently have, as far as that's concerned. So those are very low risk. Moderate risks, if you must participate, and I've heard of residents that are already planning to do kind of one-way trick-or-treating. So as opposed to having candy grab bags, or bowls of candy, doing individually wrapped goodie bags lined up on tables for families in the neighborhood to come by, grab, and go. So you don't have any physical distancing. And if you're doing that, of course, washing your hands with soap or water prior, for at least 20 seconds before and after preparing those bags, setting them out, distanced on a table, so that kids that are coming by can pick them up without touching lots of bags. And then making sure that if you're going trick-or-treating kind of within your local neighborhood and picking up these separate bags, ensuring that everyone's wearing appropriate face covering. So I already have my Halloween face covering worked on, and ensuring that you maintain safe social distance from people that aren't in your household. So I think that's a critical thing. Everyone should bring hand sanitizer and continue to wash your hands immediately, if you've touched anything, or after you come back home. And then, of course, candy shouldn't be eaten while you're outside of your home, because that requires removing your mask and touching the wrappers in your face. And I think that's an important thing also. So, try to keep it as small as possible this Halloween. That being said, I totally understand that, and that kids want to dress up. parents want to dress up, and it is kind of a yearly occurrence. So figure out, how to be safe. Parties and all that are completely you know, out of mind and shouldn't be planned. But conceivably, it is a little bit more difficult this year because, of course, Halloween lands on a Saturday night. So normally that would be a very big party night. So if you do your part to prevent that, that's very critical. And then on Tuesday night, Sunnyvale City Council met, and so it was kicked off with a study session on the Moffett Park specific plan. So, this is one of many specific plans the city currently has undertaken as far as evaluating what the land use is in different areas of the city. This was kind of to give an update after a previous study session to talk about what the kind of ongoing community outreach will be. And there's been a lot of issues and questions about what makes sense for Moffett Park. For one thing, it's the question about sea level rise and what the plans are, what the mitigations are being planned from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's looking at transportation and land use out there. Is it feasible to put housing out there? How to create more open space? How to make it more environmentally friendly? All those are things that are currently being evaluated. And over 2 or 3 sessions, one in November, December, another one in January, February, another one in March, April, we'll hear back from the community. We'll hear back, directly from, so it's what's being envisioned as kind of a community outreach portion of the meeting. So we give updates, we get community input, and then we hear back from council members. So it's kind of a long study session where we hear a staff report, we get community feedback, and then council gives feedback to staff on what makes sense. So that was, how we kicked off that council meeting on Tuesday night. We also declared, of course, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So, and I've had multiple friends and family that have been affected by breast cancer. Education is really important, and early detection is critical. So, see, the importance of a mammography is critical at the end of the day. Most of the tumors are treatable, and from that standpoint, 1 in 8 women will be affected by breast cancer in their lifetimes. And it's not just breast cancer just doesn't affect women. Of course, it does affect men. And being educated, doing appropriate screenings, that's critical. So happy to have Bobby Smyrny, who has been basically broadcasting the importance of education and testing for about 17, 18 years now. She actually joined us to receive that proclamation, so I was happy to see that. And then we also declared October as Art and Humanities Month, and I'm a big proponent for the arts, for creativity, for getting young and old involved in artistic measures, because I do think it's really important. And from that standpoint, that was one of the things that we did at last year's State of the City event. Bring in 5 muralists who actually did within a single day a Sunnyvale mural, and you can actually see those murals on Murphy Avenue. There's been a Art on Tuesday Night event all through September that had kids do add to their own mural. So there's a large paper out there on Murphy Avenue on one of the mural boards, so that kids could draw, could sketch, could do their own scrapbooking kind of photo collage sort of thing. So it's actually been pretty interesting. And so Art and Humanities Month, definitely do your part to enjoy the arts, because we have lots of sculpture throughout the city, and actually we'll be getting to finally the art master plan sometime soon. And so that'll be really important, that we'll talk about what the long-range vision of art in our community really is. And then as far as official business, we did several things. I talked about um, the making the roadway safety plan. So we adopted a roadway safety plan, so that kind of prioritized 8 signalized intersections and 6 unsignalized intersections as far as getting grant funding from the state and the federal government. So that was, that was approved without too much issue. It had been previously recommended as staff recommendation from the BPAC. So that was actually positive. So we can get started on those different intersections that were listed. And some of the other things we did, we also adopted we finally received the Eruv study. So an Eruv is basically for Orthodox Jewish community. It basically creates an area that during the Sabbath they can do a little more than stay in their homes. Right now on the Sabbath, there's certain restrictions in the Jewish community about what they can do outside of their homes. And this has been done in Palo Alto, this has been done in San Jose, and this came to council about 2 years ago. Council then ranked it as a study issue, and it took about a year and a half to actually get to the point where we are today. So on Tuesday night, we approved a master encroachment agreement, and what this basically does is, to create this Eruv is based upon, it has to be physical barriers to kind of extend what that community is and what they can do outside of their home. And it's mainly fences and, walls, like the Highway 85 sound wall is one of the areas. And then conceivably it's filament, basically string or wire that goes between like light poles that kind of mark a boundary to create an area, to create an enclosed area. And so that encroachment permit was approved and can be approved, and so that master encroachment agreement was approved, and then that allows this community to basically apply to put between light poles at 20 feet up a fine line that basically you can't even see from the ground, but it marks that area and basically creates that Eruv. So from that standpoint, we approve that, and I think it shows, from our standpoint, it supports the diversity in our community. It really is a positive thing. I was happy that it was a unanimous decision from City Council, as well as the other positive thing is we had members from that community as well as members that aren't part of that community, of our Jewish community in our city, come out and speak for that. And I think that to me is a very positive thing, that Sunnyvale is really a diverse community, and I think we're better because of that diversity. And from my standpoint, it's good to see whatever we can do to highlight and support our different neighborhoods, our different communities. So to me, I was proud that went through. The other thing we did from a council standpoint is we adopted positions on state measures and local measures, and most of them we didn't take either. We took no position on, but 3 specific measures we did support. One of which was support for Measure M, and that's the Fremont Union High School District parcel tax, which is important. And our schools are always needing funding, and I think that's really important because especially where the high school is. And then Measure S, so Santa Clara Valley Water District. So this was an extension on something that had been approved previously. So it's a parcel tax to make sure that we have safe water and a good water supply. It's also for the Anderson Reservoir rework and reconstruction. So there were definitely that reservoir was seen as at risk depending upon what happens with earthquakes, and so that's one of the things that has been looked at. But every about 5 or 6 years, we keep bringing this back to the ballot to re-up or basically reapprove that parcel tax. And so what this has done is given kind of long-term funding to make sure that we have safe water. And then of course the big thing is RR. So Measure RR for railroad is supporting the Joint Powers Authority Caltrain 1/8 cent sales tax. And to me, this was critical. I did a lot of advocating before this actually got on the ballot to make sure that our county supervisors were providing this. It's critical. You know, for every person not on Caltrain going north or going south. That's one less person on 101, on 280, and I think Caltrain has really shown it's been a fantastic addition to the peninsula, for people getting from San Jose to San Francisco or the opposite way. It's been well run with about 70% fare box return. So you see, about 70% of their operations has been completely covered by the people actually buying tickets or the companies buying tickets for their employees. So I think that's been very positive. And then as we look towards electrification, that is really critical. Making sure that electrification moves forward, and we're starting to see that is finally making a lot of progress. You'll see what they've done at the Caltrain station downtown. But to me, it's making sure that as we electrify, then we add capacity. We'll have more baby bullets coming down from San Francisco to Sunnyvale, and just a lot more operation of that train, a lot more frequency, which really makes it more of a better commute, as opposed to just having a few 5 baby bullets, each way in the mornings, and similar things at night. So yeah, I think that was really good. We didn't take positions on the majority of the other items. There's been one of the items that we debated quite a bit was Prop 15, and that could kind of change effects on businesses from a property tax standpoint. Kind of clearing up some of the Prop 13 issues. From what I see, I was an early supporter for that measure, but as I've talked more and more with our county assessor, and seen some presentations, there are questions about implementation. This could be, as opposed to a split roll, a split rate, might actually be a lot easier. And this could be done at the legislative standpoint. I'm hoping our state legislators, if this doesn't pass, take a very good look at what could be done on fixing this, as opposed to, I think, what this state ballot measure has done has caused a lot of confusion, and I think might cause some issues in the long run, and especially some of our small businesses that I've heard from that are in let's say older, the landlords has owned some of these buildings for a long time, and keeps the rents very low because of the property taxes. If the property taxes go up quite a bit, then the small businesses will be hit by similar increases on their rent. So we'll see. I've been talking to a lot of different people on this. As much as I'd love the additional funds for our schools and for our city, we'll see where this goes at the end of the day. And then on Wednesday, Governor Newsom, that was the last day for him to sign or veto any of the bills that the legislature had passed during this last session. And there was a whole Zoom meeting with the legislators. I'll highlight a few of the ones that were signed. AB 1506 and requires the state attorney general to investigate fatal police shootings of unarmed civilians. So that was, I think, positive in regards to George Floyd. And then AB 1196 formally banned the use of chokehold and neck restraints by law enforcement, and we'd already done that from a Department of Public Safety for Sunnyvale. But I think it's important that's removed from all jurisdictions in the state. So I think that was important. And then another one of their bills was AB 3088, and it gave renters financially impacted by COVID a reprieve until February 2021. And in order to avoid being evicted, renters would have to come up with 25% of the rent they owe between September and January, and then landlords could collect the missed rent payments, including the remaining 75% in the small claims court, starting in March of 2021. Oh yeah, and there's one thing, SB 793 bans the sale of flavored tobacco. And so this has been, a long time coming. This was a bill by our state senator, Jerry Hill. And so basically reducing the number of kids that are vaping, smoking, using tobacco products. So this prohibition does include pods and vape pens, tank-based systems, menthol cigarettes, and chewing tobacco. So I think the onus of responsibility relies on the retailers, of course, and they can be fined if they continue to sell these products. But it was it was going back through. It was signed at the end of August, but officially goes into effect on January 1st. So it was when I was going through some of the state bills that had been signed, I had seen that I'd actually missed this bill. So it's good from my standpoint to actually go through some of the state bills that made it through. And there were, of course, some controversial ones that Governor Newsom decided to veto. And so, it's always that kind of give and take from a legislature standpoint, and what the governor ultimately approves or decides that he doesn't want to approve. And then on Wednesday, the state issued some kind of change on the COVID metrics, and it's to deal with, I'll say, some of the underserved portions of our communities. And so the latest metrics on counties as far as reopening. So we're currently, so it's 4 tiers: purple, red, orange, and yellow. Currently we're in the red tier, but in order to move into a new tier, there's kind of an additional evaluation that equity is important in counties over 106,000 residents. And I don't know why specifically 106,000 residents were there, but I'm assuming that there's a county with 105,000 that push back from a state standpoint. But it reduced, there's basically a quantitative evaluation of if 25%, focusing on the 25% of the lowest underserved communities and making sure that we're reducing infections in those areas. So in talking to Supervisor Smitty last night, it's conceivably it's East San Jose, it's Morgan Hill. It's making sure that those communities have appropriate testing, have appropriate support for where the most underserved communities in need live. And the county must invest in testing, contact tracing, outreach services in those communities. That new requirement takes effect, I think, next week, October 6th. So we'll see how that affects, what the county's doing on a weekly basis on going forward, and conceivably it slows down that next transition going from red into the orange tier. So we'll see where that goes. And then let's talk about what's coming up from a city standpoint. Definitely, as far as me, it's election season. We're just over a month away from Election Day. I'll be at the farmers market again tomorrow. Drop by for a yard sign, campaign button, or to talk about the issues. Please get the word out. Visit LarryForMary.com. So visit www.LarryForMayor.com to find out more information about my campaign. Figure out what my past, what my issues are, what my accomplishments have been over the last 4 years on council, both as council member and as mayor. And then, of course, other things that are coming up. The draft housing study has been released. I keep bringing this up. It'll come to council in about 2 weeks, so on October 13th. Uh, and so that will, that's basically lays out a study that's kicked off about 3.5 years ago, talking about measures that we can do to make sure that we have a good housing stock, of different types. That goes from, and looking at new measures that we can do from a right to lease for apartment owners to a ordinance as far as rent stabilization for our mobile home community, to other things that we could do as far as increasing our inclusionary housing requirements for apartments or for below market rate um, for sale. So, there's a lot of things. Definitely, we look forward to your feedback on that night, as well as, go through it, send emails to council@sunnyvale.ca.gov, get your feedback in, and tell us what you want, what you would like to see from a city standpoint as far as housing. Okay. Let's see, and then let's go ahead and get to the county health dashboard like we do every week. From a county standpoint, we've reached about 21,500 approximately positive COVID-19 cases, which is about 700, up 700 from last week. Of course, we've seen a steady decrease in the number of new test cases. So I think a few weeks ago it was 1,000. Last week was 900. This week it was 700. So from a county standpoint, we are doing much better. We're seeing a steady rate of decline in the number of test cases. We've had 325 deaths in the county, and so that continues to happen, about 10 to 15 every week. And then as far as hospitalizations, we currently have 110. Sorry, we have 87 compared to 110 last week, which shows a pretty good drop. And we've seen a steadily decrease in both the number of new test cases as well as hospitalizations. From a city standpoint, San Jose is still the big location. They've had 14,100 positive COVID-19 cases. That's up 350 from last week, but that's way down from steady trend of 650 to 550, now 350. And similarly in Sunnyvale, we have 960 test cases that people have tested positive for COVID-19. That's up only 24 from last week, as opposed to 45 the week before. So we've seen, a similar sort of downturn as far as new test cases. So, it's positive. Thank you for doing your part to help slow the spread of COVID-19. Definitely, there are people that are not wearing their masks every now and then, and your people are kind of breaking their bubbles or extending their bubbles, but people are being safe, and so I'm happy to see that from that standpoint. I continue to do a lot of advocating on your behalf at the county level, at the state, and of course federal level. I've continued discussions with the county health and our county supervisors. The pop-up ban will be back in September or in October. So it's normally the second and fourth Mondays. Of course, October 12th is a county holiday, so the next pop-up at Murphy Park will be, from a county standpoint, county pop-up van standpoint, will be 2 weeks from today. That'll be October 12th, and so you can get tested there. And then, sorry, that's not right. It's October 16th. So October 12th is a holiday. That Monday is a holiday. It's Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day. It's not a holiday for the city of Sunnyvale, but it is for the county. So 2 weeks from today, October 16th, we will have testing at Murphy Park, and then 2 weeks, the fourth Monday, which is October 26th, we'll again have it at Murphy Park. And things have changed slightly. The county had been doing, and it's still by reservation. It was 3 days before, but they've now changed it to a week before you can actually sign up to reserve a spot to get tested. So they've made it a little bit easier. After pushing them, they've actually increased, or they've also added a number of languages. So now it's Spanish and Chinese and Vietnamese, not just English, which had been an issue that I raised to them about a month ago. And if you need to get tested anywhere, you can always go to scfreetest.org, and they have a full list of pop-up locations around the county, as well as permanent locations where you can go and get tested. El Camino Hospital has been actually very, very useful as far as testing people in the district. And then there's a lot more opportunities for also getting your flu shot. And as we mentioned earlier, get your flu shot. It's hopefully this season will be less with people wearing masks, but it is flu season coming up. So between COVID and the flu, it could be a very difficult year. And let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. What's happening with playgrounds, and I've been talking about this for a few weeks now. 2 weeks ago, no, it's almost 2.5, almost 3 weeks ago, we opened several playgrounds within our city, and this was after pushing the county because of differences in their county health order that didn't really make sense. That we've added signage, and signage is up at 4 different parks: Lakewood, Braley, Las Palmas, and Ortega Park. The playgrounds are open, but please remember that kids and parents should maintain a safe distance. They need to wear a face mask, and children should sanitize before and after using playground equipment. And so parents need to become prepared, bring hand sanitizer, making sure that we're trying to stop that spread. Several cities have now followed suit. So I was talking to one of the Mountain View council members last night, and they just opened their playgrounds this week. So we're starting to see more and more of that, and especially as kids are back to school and remote learning, it's important that they have places to go and get some exercise, get some, be outside, and I think that's important. Staff is still monitoring. We talked about making a decision about whether or not we open up more parks. There's been a few complaints, but in general, I think the response has been positive. So the city manager, I think, is making that decision either today or Monday about whether or not we're going to open up additional parks, or additional playgrounds at our parks. The other thing, of course, is National Night Out, and so a question was whether or not we'll have National Night Out this year. It's normally the first Tuesday, and National Night Out's been a yearly occurrence for years. This is normally the first Tuesday in August, where residents go out, meet their neighbors, have maybe a block party. It was canceled, it was canceled in August because of COVID, and COVID really hasn't left our community. So it was supposed to happen October 6th, so this upcoming Tuesday. So it is now fully canceled, and we had our community, our neighborhood community grant and neighborhood grant meeting last night as a council subcommittee. We ultimately looked, and a lot of the events that have been planned are now, either completely are postponed or completely canceled, because a lot of those were tied to block parties related to National Night Out. So, hopefully we'll have more openings within our neighborhoods, and being able to bring our neighbors more together next year, I think is pretty important. So that's kind of the update on playgrounds, and kind of general grouping and gatherings. Definitely the county is looking at religious functions and weddings versus wedding receptions. religious activities indoors, and so all that is pretty limited right now. And that's one of the things that you know whether or not a lot of churches have moved to online religious ceremonies, as well as a limited outdoor gathering. So we're looking at doing that. Of course, rainy season is coming, and we'll see where things go. That's one of the things that I've been talking to the county supervisors about, is for one thing of looking at gatherings. The other thing, of course, is restaurants and how restaurants can move indoors. So we've talked about it several times with county health so far, and they're currently evaluating what guidelines. And so this past week, San Francisco moved to a certain amount of indoor restaurant operation, and New York City did that, on September 30th. So we're looking at their guidelines. We're trying to figure out what we can do. It's not something that we just want to jump into from a restaurant standpoint. It's like training wheels. It's you want to start with a little bit, and maybe raise them and make it a little wobbly, and that whole concept of let's figure out a little bit at a time how we can open up. And so we'll see what the county health department is considering as far as that's concerned. But I'm happy that we're continuing that fight and seeing what can be done. The question is, when will street parking be limited again? So right now, we have, and we still have the 72-hour restriction from a city standpoint. That being said, we have the public safety department has been a little, let's say, more lenient. Although that being said, if somebody complains, they will still, they changed what they've done quite a bit. That they will go out and not just put the marker that, okay, the notice that you have 72 hours to move this vehicle, but they will go out and directly try to contact the owner of that vehicle to make sure that if people are sheltering in place, that they understand that they do need to move it at some point within the next few days. So we haven't completely gotten rid of the whole concept of limiting parking on the street to 72 hours, but we have been trying to deal with the issues of COVID-19 and how people might be affected, and giving them a little bit more time. That being said, if somebody is blocking traffic, if somebody's blocking somebody's driveway, we will go, they will go out and tow that car. There are kind of limits to what's prescribed. If somebody's in front of a fire hydrant, there's also all those sorts of things. But right now there isn't a timeline on stopping that, because we're are already still enforcing it. And I have heard complaints from residents who they've been contacted by public safety because one of their neighbors has complained about a car that hasn't been moved for some extended period of time. And at that point, what we need to do is ultimately contact the owner of that vehicle, so that they can ultimately know that they do ultimately need to move it. How are senior hours at farmers market being enforced? They're not being enforced right now. It's a suggestion from a farmers market standpoint, and it was really important when we were still on Murphy Avenue, and basically lining both sides of Murphy Avenue with different farmer stalls. That being said, now that we've moved, Murphy Avenue has been closed, and I'm happy. I've heard a lot of positive feedback from residents that, now that Murphy Avenue is closed, how can we keep it that way? But Murphy Avenue is now just for alfresco dining. When the market moved to Washington Avenue and Francis, it was only on one side of the street. If you talk to the farmers market, basically the company that runs the farmers market, or our farmers market, that's still kind of officially senior hours, the farmers market, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. but they're not enforcing that. The way it's currently set up, it gives a lot more space for people to line up, for people to go around. And I know people that go as early as 8:30 to start going to their favorite farmers and buying the food then. So you can go earlier, but it's not officially enforced. It's just a suggestion that 9 to 10 a.m. are farmers market senior hours. And a lot of stores, grocery stores, some of them still have senior hours that they have, but a lot of them, some of them have actually stopped the senior hours, but they're still, controlling what they can as far as um, as far as who's coming in at certain times, or they're just reducing the number of people in the store at any given time. And I think that's the biggest thing. So if you see long lines at Trader Joe's, I think Trader Joe's is one of the best as far as monitoring how many people are in the store at a given time. So you'll see, lines out in front of Trader Joe's to a large degree. Let's see. What other questions? Oh yeah, the question I got again this week, when is Whole Foods opening? So that's positive. I put some photos up last week about the interior. They've made a lot of progress. You're starting to see checkout counters go in, the interior lighting, the actual shelving going in. So right now, Whole Foods is scheduled to open up at the beginning of November, and you're starting to see the final touches being put on what it's going to look like indoors. I'll hopefully have more photos of that for you sometime soon. Question is, what is Halloween going to look like? And I went through this earlier. It's a reduced, low risk to moderate risk measures, and you figuring out what's best for you and your children. I do think it's important. Question is, what's happening with the election? So everyone will be getting their mail-in ballots next week. So please educate yourself on the candidates. Please, if you aren't registered to vote, please register to vote, and you can do that at several of the polling booths. But there'll be ballot drop boxes that'll pop up in the city next week, and there'll be several. One at the library, one at City Hall, one at the community center, one at Sunnyvale Community Services. So there will be a lot of locations around the city that will actually have drop-off boxes for your ballots. And then, as I talked about previously, there'll also be voting centers opening up, and I'll give you those when it gets closer to that date. Some of them will open 11 days, so there'll be 22 locations around the county that'll open up 11 days before Election Day. And then there'll be another 80 that will open 4 days. So on Halloween, that'll open up 4 days before Election Day. And so at those, you can get either, you can turn in your ballot, you can get a replacement ballot, or you can sign up to vote if you want, if you're not currently registered to vote. So all those are things that are coming up from an election standpoint. And then, of course, there's been several forums, League of Women Voters forums, Livable Sunnyvale forums. Those can be found online, and I posted some of those on my Facebook page, so you can go find out about that. And of course, you can still mail in your ballot, and the county registrar is extending when ballots can be turned back in. And so from that standpoint, it's important that all those ballots, whether or not it's the 90 plus drop boxes or the voting centers around the county or the mail-in ballots, get counted. Everybody's vote is important. Making your voice heard is critical. And if you mail in your ballot by or on November 3rd, even with a delay conceivably in mail, we could have up to 7 days for the county to actually receive those ballots. So it's actually positive from that standpoint, and they're doing whatever they can to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, and from that standpoint, everyone is able to to get their ballot in however they want. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for Sunnyvale residents to vote this year. One of the other things coming up, of course, is REACH codes and what's happening with the REACH codes. There's been a lot of discussion. It's went to several commissions, and ultimately that will be coming to City Council the end of October. And so that's our new business codes. It's whether or not we, remove gas connections to new construction, whether or not we do, make everything electric, what we do from EV requirements within our multifamily apartments or condos. So there's a lot of things that comes to council at the end of October. I think that's about it. It is after 10 a.m., so it's time to wrap up. Thank you for joining me again this week. It's, as always, I continue to be proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. I know it's difficult. It's been a long time, and now we've made it to fall. So we've, went through spring, we went through summer, now we're in fall. I know new issues come up every week. Your response can make a difference and has made a difference. Please help your neighbors, make and share masks, mow your neighbor's lawn, share baked goods or fruit you pick from your trees, write positive chalk messages or put messages in your windows. All that really helps. It helps build community, especially during, difficult times. People are going through a lot. People have been really affected, and people say that they appreciate, words of encouragement as well as what I've done, what their neighbors have done. So I'm proud to see Sunnyvale really pulling together to help their neighbors and help strangers. So if you're out on a walk, wave, say hello from a safe social distance. People miss that that social interaction. People miss the handshakes and the hugs. But Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We'll get through this together. Thanks for listening. Until next week, stay safe, wear your mask, and have a good week. So thank you. Thanks for joining me again. Take care.